Hi, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for staying long enough for this presentation about the Student Journal Forum, from a local event to a Canada-wide movement. This is my first time presenting in person in 2 years. This feels surreal. Sarah's presentation was yesterday, so I'm sure it was surreal as well. My name is Mariya Maistrovskaya. I'm a digital publishing librarian at the University of Toronto Libraries, and I'm a settler on the unceded land of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee. And I'll let Sarah introduce herself.
Yeah. And my name is Severson, so I'm a digital projects librarian working at the University of Alberta, which is situated in Edmonton, or so-called Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory.
We also represent the 2022 organizing committee for the Student Journal Forum that was just held, it was held in February, but it feels like just yesterday. 10 institutions that are represented here with their logos that were involved in the organization of it. So before I go ahead, just a quick show of hands. Who has heard about the Canadian Student Journal Forum? Okay, yeah. 2 Canadians, I see. Okay, so this was a test because at the Library Publishing Forum in 2019 in Vancouver, we presented on it, shame on you, on the progress up to then, and now we're happy to follow up because much progress has been made since. So today we will talk about why we started hosting the annual Student Journal Forum, how it evolved over the past 7 years, and what lessons and future directions we identified in the process. So this is a quick timeline of the forum evolution, but if it's too small to read, don't worry, because I will go over its evolution through the years in more detail. It was born at the University of Toronto in 2015. At that time, U of T had about 60 student journals. Of them, only 15 were hosted by the libraries. And believe me, when I say 60, it took a lot of digging to actually find them because they were not in any single list. They were all over the place. There were library services available to support journals in different ways. We were already providing OJS hosting. Students could submit their print archives into the university archives. They could be included in the catalog. We could provide copyright consultations. But those supports were not in any one single place. They were not very well known to students. Additionally, student journals could rely on other supports through student unions, departments. At that time, we had the Hard House Literary and Library Committee. And once again, not all of this was well known. So the goals for the Student Journal Forum, as it appeared then in 2015, was to connect student journal teams with the services available to them at the university libraries and beyond to help share best practices in publishing, different skills and tips, and to get them to work together, network, and share their tips that would be helpful to them. This is where, in my notes, I have put link to the Student Journal Forum into the chat, and we are not on Zoom, so this is part of my transition to in-person presentation. You will get the slides and you can click on the link then. So the first few years of the Student Journal Forum were kind of similar. It was an in-person event. It was run on site. It was either a full day or a half-day event, and we would provide lunch, which was a serious impetus for students to attend. There would usually be presentations by librarians and sometimes by invited faculty speakers, and we would also invite student editors to join on a panel. There would usually be some form of a networking or show and tell sessions, sometimes as part of the lunch hour, sometimes separately, and we would usually get 40 to 50 attendees. So here I have a few examples of the sessions we had, a combination of keynote speaker sessions and panel sessions by student editors, librarian presentations, and a faculty keynote speaker. These are from different years. And just to make it a little more entertaining, I pulled some photos from our archives. So here are some from the very first Student Journal Forum, from the show and tell, where students were encouraged to bring their print copies if they published in print, or bring their laptops and show their electronic versions. and panel presentations, more show and tells. So 2020 was the first year that we stepped outside of this U of T only event and decided to expand it to all institutions in Toronto. So Toronto has University of Toronto, it has York University. I don't see Tomasz here, unfortunately, he was involved in that year's event. And we also have OCAD. Thank you, I totally blanked, like, what was O again? Yeah, that was Ontario. The event was co-organized between the University of Toronto and York and attended by students from 3 institutions. Students from U of T and York both presented on a joint panel. And for the first time, we also hosted a half-day bootcamp for editors. So if you're curious about what we covered in that bootcamp, here is the program for that afternoon. It was co-presented by librarians, as well as our fantastic student library assistant at the time, who was also an editor-in-chief of a student journal. So lots of hands-on experience. And once again, a few photos from that year. This was the panel and table topic discussions. It still feels weird that people could just sit this closely to one another. Okay, now moving on to 2021 and passing it over to Sarah.
So 2021 is when I joined, which is where I'm going to be speaking from. So 2021, this is when the pandemic hit. So just a reminder here, the 2020 event was in February. So it was right pre-pandemic. So 2020 in the summer, Mariya sent out a call. We have a Canadian Slack listserv of all the Scalcom librarians and just said, hey, is anybody else interested in organizing something online, right? And so online means anybody can join. So it was a very collaborative kind of collective that came together. We just started meeting and talking about what we could do for next year. And so again, here is a list of all the different universities. What I want to point out here is that this spans Canada, right? So this is all the way, SFU is in British Columbia, and we're going all the way across the eastern provinces. Time zones, this was really fun because there's a lot of time zones. But it was a really great experience in terms of just collectivity, right? So this is another thing, is most of these librarians were all working in silos, and most of us were not coming together. So the Student Journal Forum, I'm going to be honest, was kind of a reason to get together as well. So we were meeting regularly to talk about the format. So we basically kept the same format as the last year's because it kind of worked. We decided on 4 days this time, but really short days. And so I think we had about 3 to 4 hour sessions with a big break in the middle. We invited student editors based on kind of who we knew, what we thought that they could talk about. A couple librarians led more skill-based sessions. And then we had one plenary speaker kind of talking about the impact of student publishing that had happened on her career as a scholar. And then we also decided kind of last minute to throw in some networking sessions in between, right? So open up the Zoom room, people can come talk, and we had kind of a Google Doc and all of that going together. So here's an example of some of the sessions that we did, you know, student panels about peer review, talking about the problems. Journal show and tell, this was one of the kind of most popular sessions where people just got to talk about their own journal and talk about what they were doing. Networking sessions, I mentioned. One of the best ones I think that came off was actually Ask Me Anything of the University of Toronto Press. I really want to bring this back next year. And then just kind of presentations, as I said, about, you know, so we were talking about skill sessions led by librarians. This was about, you know, typesetting and Word and accessibility, so very skill based. We also had, this was another one of the student presentations. So this is the kind of format that we had in Zoom. And this is Priscilla, and she's one of the student journal editors that works with Mariya and was talking about kind of project management 101. So 2022 comes around and we thought, great, this worked out really well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kind of pros and cons after, but we decided to do it again. So online, but the big difference here is we get together in the fall and we decide, what if this was student-led? So the surprise is, well, this shouldn't be a surprise, but when we organized it all and we did all the presentations, it was a lot of work. Second of all, it wasn't actually driven by student priorities, right? And that was really the focus of these events, the student priorities. And so we thought, let's do a call for proposals. Let's see what they want to do. We were so uncertain if anybody was actually going to apply. We weren't sure if they were going to need help, if they had experience doing proposals. So we kind of really talked through this process of how we were going to get people. So things like we offered support. We offered people, you know, if you weren't sure about your topic, you could get a mentor and all of these things. Probably wasn't necessary in the end, but we were really thinking about this as a developmental process. We received 25 proposals, which was more than we had anticipated. So this was really great. And this dictated how long we decided to do the forum. Decided to offer it over 2 days this time. We definitely got the feedback that 4 days was too much. So we did 2 days and we kind of actually shortened up the slots. And so originally we thought, oh, we'll give them 40 minutes. We started thinking after the fact that maybe 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes was better so we could get a more breadth. We did not turn anybody down. We did have a rubric and we did review it internally to make sure that everyone was kind of there. But in the end, we decided that we weren't going to turn anybody down. We also got sponsorship from PKP, which was wonderful. So we were able to offer things like gift cards to some of the student presenters. We just did a draw. And again, it was just this idea of trying to acknowledge that they were putting in labor for this. And then we also created a mailing list this time around. So I'm going to kind of come back to this a little bit, but community building is the focus of these events. And we've been trying to think through, how do we do this online, right? How do we create the community building? Because that's what people really talked about positively about the in-person forums. So we created a mailing list because that's what we do. And that's run through the University of Toronto. And we kind of use that to talk about events and go through. So here is an example of some of the student-led presentations. Again, I just cannot emphasize more how impressed I was with all of the presentations, the breadth. You can read the program still online, the topics that they wanted to talk about, the abstracts that they wrote. It was really, really impressive. So this is one of them from the student journal, the University of Toronto Caribbean Studies. Here's some more of the journals. So Health Sciences Inquiry, Relocations, to give you an idea, again, of the types of journals that presented. This is one of my favorite covers, the Meducator and Flux. And again, these are all different universities as well. So this is McGill, McMaster, Simon Fraser University, University of Alberta, and they're also all located in different places. So Mariya talked about journals that were in Toronto, right, at the University of Toronto. U of A, our journal list is actually just the ones we host. I've never actually gone out and talked to journals from other ones. So that's something I plan to expand a little bit and think about the journals, or maybe even publications, right? I tend to think about journals as being very narrow, about OJS and about being peer review, but I'm thinking more for next year about publications. Well, what about the newspapers? Would they be interested in some of these publishing topics? And then also a lot of these journals are maybe across Canada. So I use the example here of the Health Sciences Inquiry one at the top. And it's because it's located at the University of Alberta. We're the ones that work with them, but their actual editorial team is across Canada. And so this is a graduate level journal. And I think right now the editors are actually in Ontario. And so it doesn't have that kind of the student journal doesn't have the same association with a specific university, which I think is really great. So again, trying to build that that community. So here's examples of the feedback. What did they like? We asked them, of course, we're librarians, we sent feedback forms, right? So what did they find useful? So overall, people really liked it. They really appreciated hearing from their peers and learning from other people's experiences. This is something we heard over and over again. They wanted to hear other people talk about peer review. They didn't want to hear us talk about how to do peer review. On the same token, they really enjoyed the boot camp and other practical sessions that the librarians led. So we're hearing kind of two different things in that way. And they wanted an expert to tell them how to do it properly. That was really specific. And they really enjoyed being able to ask questions in smaller groups and table topics. I should clarify, this summary is for all of the forums. So this includes in-person and the online. We kind of summarized it because it really was actually quite consistent. Here's some examples of quotes. Enjoyed hearing about different student journals, learning about making journals accessible. Copyright practices, we got all excited when people actually talked about that. But what could be improved, right? That's also really important to talk about. So we got some feedback about more focuses on technology, and that was specific to how to use social media. Shorter technical talks. I'm personally listening to that one, shorter technical talks. I have been thinking a lot more about how we teach, especially around these processes and talking to other colleagues. And I've been hearing a lot of really positive things about half-an-hour presentations. So very, very focused and very, very short presentations that really only introduce you to one thing so that you can kind of practice it. So I'm really thinking about that. And more boot camp time. And so that was those practical skills from the previous sessions. So now I want to look into the future, right? We're going to be doing this in 2023. It's kind of a little bit of a no-brainer at this stage. But what have we learned, right? We were reflective of this process. So online means more people can attend, which is amazing. And we got really excited about that. It's really much harder to build community though. We definitely heard that from people. They felt very isolated. They didn't necessarily get that kind of community aspect, which was so important on the in-person forums. Just because they can't attend doesn't mean they do. So spoiler alert, attendance has been really low for all of the online events. So this is something we're balancing. It's still, I think, very valuable, even if only 25 people attend, you know, a Zoom call, you know, when it's a lightweight and we're kind of doing this over and over again, we have the systems in place. I still think it's really valuable, but I want to be transparent about that these are not hundreds of people that are attending. We talk a lot about this as a Canadian forum. It is actually open to anybody. I mean, it doesn't matter who attends. It's just that the focus tends to be on Canadian things, right? We're talking about Canadian copyright. We're talking about building community there. The switch to student-led CFP, I think, was a great move, and partly because that actually meant less work for us during the forum. We didn't have to give the presentations, and I think they give better presentations. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that a lot of library staff attended. So I would say roughly, like maybe a quarter of the attendees were actually library staff. And this was librarians from other institutions. This was people on the organizing committee. And this was also just library staff across that were maybe interested in publishing. This surprised us. We weren't really too sure, but I think it speaks to something, right? It speaks to this desire for professional development. Informally, I've talked to colleagues who attended, and so I heard things like I wanted to learn the skills about accessibility around word formatting and things. And then I also heard I wanted to see what the students were doing. I wanted to learn more about what was happening in student journals. I think that's really valuable to know. What's next? We're doing the call for the committee right now. We're really revisiting that publishing skills bootcamp. What I'm going to propose to the new committee when we pull it together at the end of summer is that maybe we do a 2-day event of call for proposals from students, and then we do a 1-day kind of maybe 3-session skills bootcamp. Maybe we can do a hybrid, right? So online, but then we have little regional meetups by the time we do it. And then thinking through more of this community building. Something that keeps coming back up around our conversations around this is this idea of where are the student journals? What are they? Who has them, right? So this notion of a directory, right? There's no space for a directory or something. I'm gonna call out Sonia here. A couple of years ago, 2017, maybe 2018, this idea was kind of kicked around, and it was basically kind of formatted off the idea of DOAJ, but for student journals. Right, so we have this kind of list kicking around. It could be updated. We have to think through those processes, but I really wonder if this would be good for community building around student journals. Right, you could look up a similar journal to your own. You could ask them for questions. You know, there'd be a little bit more of an awareness. So I think the committee is going to talk about that and whether or not that's a job that this committee could do. So at this stage, we just wanted to leave it open for questions. We've got 11 minutes. I'm happy to talk about anything else if you'd just like to hear more.